All right. Father Ted, we are back here with a doctor and a priest. Walk into a podcast. So good to see you. This is our 5th episode already. Been getting great responses. Yeah, thank you. Today, we're talking about, as we always do, how do we bring people together? How do we, bring Christian values into our everyday lives? We're going to talk about why you have a black smudge on your forehead today, and where that comes from. About Lent, about fasting. As a doctor, I'm going to speak a little bit about the biology behind fasting and how that kind of dovetails with the clarity we might get for a higher purpose. And want to start with how are you, Uncle Ted? What was today like? Why do you have that smudge on your forehead?
Well, I'm doing okay, except I've decided to give up coffee for the Lent. I think all kinds of coffee. So I drink a lot of coffee. I love to drink coffee, especially in the morning when I wake up. But you have to fast from something. So far it's not so bad. I've been drinking water instead of coffee. We'll see how it goes.
What made you decide on coffee?
Because I think you have to fast for something which is hard. And I'm discovering that if you're really determined to do something, your willpower is strengthened. And so I think that's what when I talk to a lot of students and they want to give up bad habits, you have to make a firm decision to do something contrary to the bad habit. Of course, fasting is you're not working against a bad habit, but it does strengthen your willpower, I think. Yeah. But we can talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And what I've given up is, as you know, I'm suffering from some medical problems right now, and I actually have a surgery coming up in a week. So I started my Lent a little bit early. I don't know if that's okay or not. You can tell me. But I started it a couple of weeks ago, getting prepared for the surgery. It's on my insides on my gut, and so to kind of keep the inflammation down on this diet called low FODMAP. It stands for different sugars that you kind of put in your system and carbohydrates that make you inflamed. And so I am eating things that are very low in that. It is very restrictive in many ways. You can be creative, and I'm getting creative around making, things at home that are better, but it's at the end of the day, it's a sad beige diet. So I am doing a lot of that and got started and been quite disciplined on it before we head into the surgery. Yeah. But Father Ted, what is Lent? Let's start with that. What is Lent? Where does it come from? Why do we still have it? How do people celebrate it? Do other religions other than Catholics celebrate Lent? Tell us about what that is.
Well, all the Christian religions celebrate Lent. It's 40 days. Matthew's Gospel talks about Jesus going into the desert for 40 days. So it's imitation of that. And after the Christmas season, you have a few weeks in between, and then you prepare for Easter. 40 days before Easter, you begin Lent. And really, it's a basic purifying ourselves in order to relate better and to, develop union with Christ, because the central mystery of Christianity is participating in death to evil in order to bring about life. So we try to, in Lent, practice what helps us to improve the life of love by disciplining ourselves in order to be aware of how God is loving us and how we can, in a sense, die to what is not good and find how you live the life of God's goodness.
And why?
That's how to summarize it.
That's great. I mean, and why do we need 40 days to do that? What is it about doing that for Lent versus why not do it, any other day?
I think Christianity found out early on that, to tell you the truth, I can't remember when it actually started, but they found out really on that the fundamental mystery of Christianity was lost in the beginning. And the first Christians were very conscious of Christ, and the way he died was pure love, and that's the way you live. And I think Lent developed 40 days because of Christ himself has that story of him fasting for 40 days. And it takes time to discipline oneself.
Yeah. And then it starts with Ash Wednesday, 40 days beforehand.
Right.
And we get ashes on our head sometime today. Our forehead, right. You have them on yours already. And did you say Mass today?
I did, yes. I just said Mass here at the university for a group of mostly IT people. We all met.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah. That's fun. It's a good group. And you gave out ashes. Where do they come from? What are we burning even to get those ashes?
The ashes are from Palm Sunday, the previous Palm Sunday. Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting, that tradition? Pretty sure that's true.
Yeah. I'm
So,
pretty sure that's right. Yeah. And so that's... I think that's one of those little known facts that we know. And I like knowing that when you're in church on Palm Sunday, because it's, it becomes it connects the seasons. And you know that the thing that you're waving and have in your hand is going to be used for, a more penitent time, less celebratory time than Palm Sunday. It's interesting to have that all related to one another. And then this idea of putting a cross on your forehead, tell me about that. What does that mean to you, having that sign on you all day?
Well, it's just actually putting the crucifixion of Christ on your head and recognizing that you die, ashes represent death. I mean, it's always Christianity. Death is always leading to something better, so. But I could tell you what I just remembered about Thomas Aquinas saying what we do during Lent.
First of all, who is Thomas Aquinas, if you would?
Okay. So Thomas Aquinas was an extraordinary intellectual who lived in the 1200s. And he was a Dominican priest. He wanted to become a priest and a Dominican, and his family didn't want it. And this interesting story of him is they sent him a woman to tempt him, and he chased her away. And then he decided to become a Dominican. Well, he certainly should have been a Dominican. He was brilliant. And he took the philosophy of the Greeks, especially Aristotle, which was way before Christ, and he used that reasoning and philosophy to interpret Christianity and wrote. He was really a genius, and he could interpret using that philosophy Christianity. So when I studied in the seminary, I studied St. Thomas Aquinas for 4 years, and he wrote a lot of things. Yeah.
And what did he say about Lent and fasting?
So he said, Thomas Aquinas taught that fasting had 3 purposes. The first was to restrain the flesh. Fasting helps us control lusts and desires. Secondly, fasting helps us contemplate the divine. Fasting helps our minds focus on higher things and contemplative things like heaven. And thirdly, fasting helps us atone for sins.
Mm-hmm.
And then I read some other things. St. Augustine was the great saint in the 4th century. And he said fasting cleanses the soul and raises the mind. If we subject the flesh to the spirit, and we render our hearts contrite and humble, so we can shatter concupiscence and lust and evil by fasting.
Concupiscence, it's a big word for lust, yes.
Concupiscence is this part of us that wants to do evil and get into bad habits, any of those tendencies that we could have. And fasting raises our minds to loving and appreciating ourselves. And it's really helping any person that I know. A number of Alcoholics Anonymous people who have really given up alcohol and just discovered a whole new life by not being addicted, so
right.
That's fasting is something like that. It helps us find the best part of ourselves to develop. Yeah.
And when you say fasting, I think it has a number of different meanings, right? We often think of fasting, especially in our modern society, around how long do you fast in terms of having daily fasting or doing day 2, 3 day fasts sometimes. Some people will fast during the daytime or for 16 hours a day and eat for 8 hours a day for health benefits. And fasting for things we're consuming. Is there another meaning of fasting right now when we're talking about what you're talking about with St. Thomas?
I don't think so that I can think of. I know medically, or I guess health-wise, there's all kinds of ways of fast. Sometimes I've read it's good to fast one day a month without eating anything.
Yeah.
But I guess all those different medical, you know much more about all of those things.
No, yeah. So I find, with St. Thomas Aquinas, when you said those 3 things, I think the second one around, deliberating a way to contemplate the divine is very right on with my own experiences with actual fasting. I do 60-hour fasts every once in a while. Drink water, of course, but find that to be incredibly cleansing. But also, eventually, you hit this kind of high, if you will, where things become clearer. And there's a medical reason for that. And there's the medical reason for why people fast for these longer fasts, 1, 2, 3 days, but also for maybe 16 hours a day or more. And that's because your body starts to uses sugar and carbohydrates to eat, right? So you eat stuff and it becomes sugar, and your brain uses it, and your liver kind of stores it up. And as you fast, the liver, it stored all the excess sugar and carbohydrates. It starts to leach it out into your blood so your brain can use it, so it has fuel. But once all the liver is done with all the sugar that it had and stored up, and so where's the brain going to get sugar to eat and carbohydrates to eat? Well, there's no more carbohydrates in your body. So where does that have to come from? It comes from breaking down fat in your body, the storage that you have of fat, and you make something called ketones. And so you get into a state called ketosis. And your brain starts to eat these ketones, the byproducts of the fat breakdown. And this is why people lose weight when they fast. But also, these ketones allow for greater clarity, improved mental clarity, because of the what are called ketone bodies that they use for fuel. It's a more stable energy source. Sugar kind of it fluctuates in your body a lot, whereas ketones are very steady, slow, coming at your brain, allowing it to use without the fluctuations, and it can concentrate more. And so I think this idea of fasting allowing us for our mind to focus, to think about things larger than ourselves, is rooted in biology. It is right there, and so it's what you do with that. And it sounds like, the encouragement from the church here is to use that moment to be able to contemplate the divine.
So, as you were talking, I kept thinking of Christianity is basically the divine and the human united in Christ. So when you describe all the things you did about what fasting can do, in all of the human things that we do, the divine life of God is present. So it's like we live this double life, human and divine. And we believe Christ is the one who you shared that in we call hypostatic union, or the union of the divine in Christ. But as you were talking, I kept thinking about how we could fast only for medical reasons or for good health, but something else is always going on in our lives, and that is, how do we find this presence of God, the divine, in our lives? And it comes, it's a gift. And I wanted to sort of, as we talked a little bit before we began the picturing, about what's going on in society today. And if it's okay, I want to just dip into that.
Sure.
Because we have to recognize that in every person, every human being, is this humanness, which is a gift, but also every human being has a dignity. It's the divine in the person, or the way God created every human being. So I think to fast in Lent is to help us, all of us, recognize how we relate to each other in that dynamic. Real good, and Pope Francis talks a lot about the parable of the Good Samaritan. He says it's sort of the key parable for Christianity, because in that parable you have a man who was fallen sick, and the man who helps him is the enemy, the Samaritan, takes him to the inn and cares for him, leaves him money, and it's explaining that we treat everybody that way, no matter who they are, because of their dignity. Mm-hmm. So that means we recognize that in ourselves too. We can get depressed about what's going on in our personal lives, or depressed in what's family life, or with the government, but the fact is that we all have a dignity, and we have to name it and claim it and grow in it, and not let any of the negative concupiscence, the evils or the temptations or the false identities control us. And it also means when we deal internationally, like other countries as a country, or as we deal with people that are poor, or as we deal with immigrants, or as we deal with people losing their jobs, for example, that central dynamic of seeing in everyone the element of their dignity is the basis for relating to each other. Mm-hmm. And that has to be preserved. And during Lent, if we fast, in a sense, we're seeking to say, how do I live that way? How do I live in that kind of a dynamic of deep respect for everyone, and treating them with the dignity they deserve? And by the way, that's how you grow. Because if you have two people relating to each other, if they each appreciate the other side, and then they share that, you grow from that. In that respect, you grow.
Mm-hmm.
If two countries do that, they grow. If government comes together and they work together, and that's how they grow, respecting each other. So it's fasting is what St. Thomas Aquinas was saying there. It's you find the divine in you, you define the justice in you, you define the love in you, you define the goodness in everyone, and you sort of fast to not let the concupiscence, or you might say, or the evil control.
So what I'm hearing there, reading between the lines a little bit, is this idea of dignity, individual dignity, having dignity for yourself, also having dignity for others, but the dignity for the community, for whole communities, is really brings us closer to the divine. That the Pope uses the story of the Good Samaritan to kind of back that back that idea up, and that as I think many of us see, that dignity is being broken down in many ways in our institutions and our communities, but in other ways it's being lifted up. I'm on this committee called the New Washington Beautification Committee, and there are people of all political persuasions on that committee. And what we do is I live in an unincorporated town, so there's no government here. So we local government, so we're responsible for making the town more beautiful, cleaning up the garbage on the side of the road, etc., because there's no sanitation. And it's just we had a meeting last night, or a couple nights ago actually, and I sat there, and I didn't say this out loud, I was just observing and thinking to myself, similar thoughts, is that everybody in that room, if you put them in the political arena, would be fighting with one another, right? About in so many different ways. They gave them a title and said, you represent the Republicans, you represent the Democrats, you represent the Libertarians, you represent an independent. They would be fighting with one another, yet we were all just working together for the betterment of the community. And I think that had to do with this larger idea of, how do we find dignity in ourselves, find dignity in the community, and try to uplift it. And I just wonder how we can translate that local, where we have more of that happening on the local level than we do on the national and international level, or even the state level. And so trying to reflect on how to take these local values and push them up. Whereas right now, I think a lot of the world is this higher national conversation being pushed down. And it's dividing us in many ways.
Well, Tim, as I hear you saying that, I hope you keep running for office, in Congress, because that dynamic is what's going to bring about unity. That dynamic is what's going to bring about growth. And it does start on a local level, I think. And we have so much happening in society that prevents that. Even people using cell phones and talking less to each other. There's a terrible trouble with loneliness. That many people are lonely today in society. And in schools too. And there's wonderful work being done in schools with the people working together. The university I'm at here, the University of Dayton, we really encourage all kinds of organizations to develop. And the students, when they come together, they know how to do it. They develop clubs for all kinds of things. You're on the right track there. And people want to do that, by the way. People want to be together. They want to enjoy each other.
It's a hard message to give, it's sometimes a lonely message to give, right? People generally agree with it, no matter what, letter you carry next to you, a D or an R or an I or an L or other. generally agree with you, but then, you know, actions and groupthink and the news and media that we have coming into our worlds and constantly barraging us, kind of, it's hard to keep that thread of how do we find the dignity in ourselves and others to be cooperative and learn in a constant state of growth and learning versus not. And it's hard out there, and we're all guilty. You and I are both guilty of it. Everybody's guilty of it, right? We're just getting hit by, like you said, our cell phones and so many other things in life. And so this time of Lent, of fasting, of simplifying, it might be something to encourage in terms of what you quote unquote give up, or what you sacrifice during this time, to say, how can we, to simplify, to find a way of being more connected to one another, and find dignity in those that we might right now be ignoring. I'm certainly not the priest, but that is how I'm reflecting on this time.
Well, we're on a journey, and there's so many forces against it, but it's very powerful.
Yeah.
That's the way. I think that's the way we really are made to be. So,
just expanding, while also switching topics for a second, because we talked about this the last time, and had some more questions from people who watched the show around what happens to the Pope if he were to become incapacitated. First of all, it sounds like he's still sick, has what's called double pneumonia. Just to explain that from a doctor's standpoint, double pneumonia is a colloquial term to mean a pneumonia in both lungs, and an infection in both lungs. That infection could be a virus or a bacteria or a fungus or anything. It could be any of those things. And it's unclear to me exactly what he has, but he's being treated for one of those illnesses that are causing the pneumonias in the hospital now. And so, all thoughts, prayers, and hopes are that he will recover. He's been very, he's been a great leader in many ways. And so, but the question is, if he's incapacitated in some way, what happens in terms of the leadership of the church? And I know that you got a little information on that.
Yeah. By the way, people might have seen the movie Conclave, which was up for the Academy Award. When I saw that movie, it's really exciting to see what happens when the Pope does die. But the reality is that Pope Francis did write a letter to say that if he was incapacitated, he would resign. The trouble with that, I've heard, is that the Pope actually has to say he resigns when he's conscious of being able to do that. So whether that letter would, if he was incapacitated or unconscious or in a state of not being able to make his own decisions, whether that letter would work, I don't know.
And who would decide that? Would cardinals come together to?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
You have, in any kind of law system, you have those delicate problems.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch this unfold as people are trying to figure out what would happen. We've gotten to a gray area of law here, and what they use the word canonical law. What can you explain what that means?
The Catholic Church is based on a whole system of laws or principles regulating administration, regulating the doctrine of the church, how it's interpreted, all kinds of things. And it's been developed through the years in order to have a better system of appointing bishops or appointing priests, and how much time a priest is educated, or what are the principles of how the sacraments are used. So to try to make them, well done, or with a system of justice, so it's done well and fairly. So it's pretty complicated, and some of the priests or other people really study it. to figure it out.
All those rules are complicated, but I think your message is pretty clear this week, especially just, finding dignity in ourselves and others can bring us a bit closer to the divine.
Right.
And if you want to get even closer, look to the biology of fasting, and that can help you too.
Yeah.
But we're at the end of our time here. Thank you again for everything that you do for people and individuals, and I love that you're expanding your reach through this podcast. You're reaching a lot of people. People love to hear what you have to say. There are some people who are big fans of yours. Actually, you're starting to get some big fans.
Well, that's wonderful to hear.
Yeah, no, I think it's been an impressive journey, and we only have a lot, many more of these to do. So, thank you again on being on Project Next.
You're welcome, and may you prepare well for your operation. May it go well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right.
Signing off.
So long, everybody. Goodbye.